All right. Hello and welcome, everybody. Welcome to another ConsenSys Cypherpunk Hackathon workshop. We are here today with Kevin Bluer, and he is going to be going through how to develop and deploy a Dapp, which is great. He's from Truffle representing. We actually did a couple get started webinar series together, so this is great. And I'm really looking forward to this one today. He's going to be showing you an actual demo and a use case that you can try yourself and tinker around and really get a sense of how everything works from start to finish around this Dapp creation and deployment. So I want to do a quick housekeeping around CrowdCast, which is the platform we're using right now. On the right-hand side is the chat. That'll be always going throughout the workshop, so feel free to chat there. I'll keep an eye on that for Kevin as he's going through the workshop. So if you do have questions, we would love it if you could just add that to the Ask a Question queue at the bottom there. If you type the question into the chat and you put the question mark before you hit enter, a little orange button will pop up so that says, would you like to add this to the queue? And you can just add it that way very quickly. So that's nice too. You can upvote any questions that are already there. So that'll give Kevin an idea of which questions to answer first. We usually get to all the questions, so please ask away. We'll always leave a little bit of time at the end for a Q&A for anything that we missed. So yeah, just that way Kevin knows what's on your mind and what we'll always have time to stop and answer any question you guys have. Also, there's polls at the bottom there. If you haven't already, please answer those. I'm going to add a couple more as we begin. So that'll help Kevin get a sense of where you guys are at and how to focus the content a little bit better. Finally, there's a call to action at the bottom there, that big shiny green button, see more workshops and sign up for the hackathon. If you click on that, you go to the Confluence doc, which is all the details about this event, has all the other workshops that you can RSVP, as well as a sign-up form for actually participating in the hackathon June 7th through the 11th. This is the team building week. So if you are interested, please let us know now. Sign up on that form. Ping us on the ConsenSys Hackathon 2021 Slack channel, and we'll get you into, we'll help you kind of form a team and help you vet your ideas. So we're really excited for everybody to join in, and maybe these workshops are inspiring you. So without further ado, I'll hand the mic over to Kevin.
Awesome. Hey, thank you, Shay. Can everyone hear? Can you hear me okay? Audio, video, all good? I'll assume so, unless I hear anything. So yeah.
Yes, sounds good.
Yeah, cool. Thank you, Shay. Yeah. All right. So yeah, welcome to this session, title of which is How to Develop and Deploy a Dapp. Going to be diving into a ton of different stuff, obviously kind of Truffle related, but other things too, and kind of prodding around the edges of all the things related to kind of the build lifecycle and so on. Cool. So yeah, just briefly about myself. As Shay mentioned, my name is Kevin Bluer. My official title within the team, obviously on the Truffle team, as Shay mentioned, is that blockchain engineer. Been with the team about 2.5 years, probably a bit over now. And my role has actually evolved. It used to be a bit more on the training side. So we used to do as Truffle kind of training with corporates and on the ground developers and so on. So I used to lead that effort. My role has evolved into a little bit more on the ecosystem side, and then really today a bit more heavily on the product dev side, on maintenance and very hands-on. So just a little bit of background there, and then broader background. 15 plus years in software development. I was about the stage now where I round it down a little bit, but of course I've worked across a number of different paradigms. Web stacks and mobile stacks and stuff, and of course decentralization for the win. If it needed to be said, it's worth saying. Huge fan of this paradigm and all the things it's bringing to the table, particularly as a from a choice that you have as a developer now or a team. Build things that are just very, very different and change things, which is to me so exciting. Cool. All right. So what to expect from this session? Kind of got 2 slides here, a little bit kind of duplicative, but I'll kind of go through them. One is what to expect at high level. The other one's the kind of TOC. table of contents. But high level, at least, will be, as Shay mentioned, getting hands-on with stuff. I put a little warning sign there next to that one, just because it can go great or it can go the other way, when you're doing live demo-y type stuff. So just kind of heads up. But to me, it's, wherever possible, it's always more fun if you can inject some kind of liveness into the session, albeit, with the risk. We'll also be looking at kind of how to extend Truffle a little bit as well. And kind of hooks with which you can do that. And the reason I wanted to call that out a little bit was just because that makes for potentially a nice hack, or piece of a bigger hack, wherein you can kind of automate things within Truffle or extend Truffle's functionality, perhaps to join it up with something else, whatever. And I'll show you some ways with which you can do that. And then the kind of hacky hands-on bit is going to be in the context of an NFT, of course. That's the kind of hotness, I guess, right now. And that's actually a newish, well, it's pretty much brand new, something called a Truffle Box that I'll be showing, that kind of walks you through that. So you can build an NFT and deploy it, and it's got some L2 support in there as well. And then I'll also, in the demo-y bit, be showing a plugin, which is this visual debugger, which is another kind of a good example of a plugin, and just show something new. And on that kind of final theme, debugging all the things as well. That'll be a theme as we go through this. Cool. As I mentioned, kind of a bit of a duplication of what we've just seen here. This is just more of a kind of formal call out of the sections. I'll be starting in a moment with talking about a kind of 10,000 feet view of both the dev lifecycle that you typically go through when building a decentralized application, and then similarly doing it really, really high level, just for folks that are a bit newer to this space, or have been in the space for a while, but perhaps haven't had the need to lift the lid on the development tooling, such as Truffle. And then we'll kind of zoom down to sort of 1,000 feet and get a bit lower, even lower than that. But yeah, I think I've called out everything on this slide already. Cool. Okay, so zooming out to like 10,000 feet or whatever, sort of high level. Again, really, these few slides are really more for folks that are perhaps either a little bit newer to the space, or been in the space but just haven't kind of had the need to get hands-on and with anything like Truffle. Perhaps haven't been involved from a dev side, dev perspective. So what is Truffle or Truffle Suite? It's about helping or it's a suite of tools that help a developer or developers, or a larger team that have an idea for a decentralized application or a Dapp, and bring that to help them realize that, help them build that as comfortably as possible. So what does that mean? Really, as mentioned, it's a suite of tools that aid in the life cycle. So as with anything that you build, there's various stages you go through to build it. Pretty much applies to anything, I guess. But in this context, it's lots of there's build and test and migrate or deploy, etc. And all of that is done in the context of Truffle within a simulated blockchain environment that really mirrors that of a live network. And obviously, it's never good practice to develop directly against production or staging, or however you want to kind of think of kind of live networks. And again, we'll be unpacking all of this as we go through. And then, finally, worth calling out that everything we build pretty much is all open source. And our GitHub org is github.com/Truffle Suite. And I think aggregate now it's around, it's over 8 million downloads across all the tools in the suite as well. Cool. So that's Truffle at a high level. Quick slide on who uses Truffle. Basically, lots of different firms, large, small, etc. And this slide, because I just cribbed this from our website, made me laugh, because you've got ConsenSys in the top right, and of course now we spun out of ConsenSys and we spun back in. And it's kind of redundant to say that ConsenSys using our tools, because we're all it's like Microsoft advertising on their website that Microsoft is a kind of user of their tools, because it's like, well, kind of that's obvious. Maybe smile, but yeah, point here, lots of different firms, everything from Fortune 500, 1000, whatever, through to earlier stage, startups, etc. So the kind of whole spectrum. Yeah, that's Truffle at a high level. Any questions, by the way, as Shay mentioned, and even if they're kind of, don't be afraid if it sounds a bit more basic, or and or a clarification or something like that, just throw it in and happily answer as we go through. Cool. So yeah, with that, let's take a look at the development lifecycle. So let's, now you know what Truffle is. Again, I'm sure some of you on this session probably used Truffle before, but what will we do to kind of go through that lifecycle and use Truffle along the way? Okay, 2 slides on the lifecycle that I want to call. The reason I've got, they kind of both talk about the lifecycle, but kind of look at it through a different lens. So this one, kind of, as you can see, it's more of a flow, infinite loop type thing, starting with plan, and then kind of going around, and you can obviously call these out, read these yourself, code, etc. And the reason we had this slide, and this is actually from kind of other decks, some of these slides are from other decks and so on, was because on the left, this was something we'd say about this, our historical kind of core focus for our tooling, and you can see some of the little icons there that represent our different tools, was the focus. And then on the right, we had something called Truffle Teams, which kind of addressed more formally these pieces on the right. And I'm going to talk more a bit about, I'm be a little bit candid because this is obviously internal as well. So Truffle Teams is something we're sunsetting, and I'll talk about it because we're open sourcing some bits of it, which is pretty neat. But anyway, Teams was the kind of right focus, and that's not to say that all our kind of core tooling didn't address things like releasing and deploying and so on, but Teams was always the kind of focus for some of these other things. But as I say, for various reasons, we're kind of sunsetting that. And one of the reasons, to be fair, is just because we're a small team, so we can't focus on everything. But what is taking that place and really worth calling out is layer 2 is a huge focus for us now. And it's complex, and there's lots of different layer 2s emerging and different ways in which you can scale and so on. So that's a huge push for us, or a huge focus and push and so on. So it doesn't necessarily fit exactly in that right-hand side, but it is, of course, part of that life cycle. If you are building, something and, you're factoring, a layer 2 solution into that, right now it's complicated. I mean, if you look at any of the docs for any of the major L2s out there, I mean, it's also new. There aren't really the patterns and processes and, ways in which you can kind of reason about it and model it and so on at all. So that's a huge thing for us. So I just wanted to kind of call that out, early on. And again, we'll be talking about this as we go through. Either way, kind of back to the point about lifecycle, our tooling, really focuses on a lot of these stages. And that's not to say, as I said, that our incumbent tooling doesn't address the pieces on the right. It really kind of does too, but, in different ways, of course. So cool. Any questions on that, throw them in and we'll get to them as well. Okay, so kind of view number 2 on the lifecycle. This is a bit more kind of linear or kind of waterfall-esque. And there's a reason I wanted to include this too, not to go through, low level, but just to call out a few things. And I guess firstly, if you were, trying to solve anything, solve something, you'd be asking, do I need a blockchain? Do I need a, DLT of some kind to help me solve that? So that's often going to be one of the first things you ask yourself as a team trying to solve something. And then, of course, if the answer is yes, and there's good decision trees out there to help you with that, then you would go along through these stages. And obviously, this overlaps with the slide, to some degree that we just saw. The reason I wanted to include this one as well in the context of the life cycle is just to, highlight some of the differences when it comes to building something, particularly the 3 orange highlighted rectangles you can see there. So the first one being development. Big emphasis on security, of course. I haven't really specifically spelled it out there. But probably goes without saying, maybe. But if you are newer to the build side of things or the development side of things, it may not be that obvious. And really, that's so important, and different in the way in which you approach things to perhaps more of a traditional, thing, application like a Web 2 or traditional sort of inherently centralized thing. And again, there's tooling to help with that, both within Truffle and kind of outside of that. But it's also the mindset. You need to really be thinking of security up front, through all of these stages, not just the development side, of course. But anyway, I want to emphasize that. Probably stating the obvious, but just in case not. And obviously, vulnerabilities in contracts can have dire consequences that are different to vulnerabilities perhaps in traditional applications. One of the big ones being is what's at stake. There is a vulnerability. Kind of immediately you could lose, significant assets. Whereas obviously it's never great to be hacked or compromised in any capacity, but perhaps less like dire if your web application, traditional centralized web application is compromised, and plus it's easier to fix and patch and so on. So again, detail, which I'll keep gloss over for now, but that's definitely a very important thing that should permeate the lifecycle and your thinking as you're building something. And then kind of relatedly, of course, as part of that flow of the lifecycle, again, depending what's at stake and how customize the thing as you're building. If you're just using something a little more like off the shelf, like Open Zeppelin ERC20 default, contracts, then maybe you don't need it, but because they're already audited, reasonably well a little while ago now. But it's all good, I guess. But certainly, if you're doing something more bespoke, you probably want to use a third-party auditing service like Diligence, of course, being a great one. And then similarly, things like bug bounties, you very likely factor in or potentially factor in again, depending on the nuance and the detail. And all of that will be done before you launch, ideally. Again, apologies kind of for the overlap on that previous slide, but a few different things that I thought were worth calling out when considering the life cycle. Cool. So with that, let's now zoom down our level a little bit from 10,000 feet to maybe 1,000 feet, something like that. And now we're going to turn our attention to some of the tools in the Truffle suite. And specifically, we're going to look at Truffle CLI, something called Ganache. And again, maybe you've used it a bunch, but in case you haven't, just going to kind of walk you through it. Also something called Truffle Boxes, which are a really good resource, particularly if you're kind of starting out and learning and kind of want to prod around with different things in a kind of nice, safe kind of sandbox type environment. And then finally, I've got a little piece here on kind of what's new and how things are, sort of changing for us and what's on our radar and so on as well. Cool. So yeah, with that, Truffle CLI. So it's a little bit confusing, just to kind of make sure we're clear here. Truffle Suite, often referred to as Truffle, is a collection of tools. Within that collection of tools, within that suite, is a tool called Truffle. So it's a bit, confusing. And there's other tools like Ganache and so on as well. So for kind of, to make sure it's not ambiguous, I've referred to it as Truffle CLI here because it's a command line interface tool, and yeah, hopefully that's clear. So yeah, Truffle CLI-based tool, as I said, and really the focus of Truffle as it, I say Truffle knowing it sounds like Truffle Suite, but of the CLI tool is the contract lifecycle. And other tools that we have focus on different parts, like perhaps the UI or debugging and testing and other things, or Truffle does that too. But yeah, Truffle CLI specifically is that whole life cycle, and got a couple more slides on this to kind of unpack that further. But as you'll see, different kind of subcommands that you would invoke when you're using Truffle to kind of guide you, walk you through that life cycle, everything from spinning up an empty project or unboxing a box through to compiling it, running tests, debugging, maybe if you need to along the way, and then migrating, which you probably have done earlier, to migrate it to a Ganache instance locally, etc. So really, the detail there is just this, you'd use Truffle and the various subcommands to kind of, as you go through the life cycle we were just talking about. For what it's worth, it's all JS based or Node.js based, and you can install it by npm or yarn, and we support all the major operating systems, as you can see here, all listed there. Okay, so just to unpack a couple of the commands that I just referred to. Sorry if this slide's a little busy. I'll go through a couple of the ones that I put little asterisks next to in a moment. But these are just some of the example commands that you run, or subcommands. So Truffle being the the executable, and then first one as a great example is Truffle init. Perhaps not use that often, just because all it does, which doesn't say it's not useful, is just kind of creates a boilerplate kind of empty project with all the kind of core constructs. So it creates a contracts directory, a test directory, a Truffle config. So all the kind of bare bones you need to get started. It's often, the reason I say it's not that used is, you might use a Truffle Box, which I'll talk about in a moment, or just have an existing kind of boilerplate in-house or something like that. So, or be forking, another thing or whatever. So, but either way, good one to start with and just kind of talk you through, the life cycle, or different commands in the life cycle. So this would create you an empty thing, an empty project. Next along, is unbox. So as I alluded to, and I'll be talking about this in a moment, just if you're not familiar with something called Truffle Boxes, this is a nice kind of shortcut way to essentially kind of git clone a box. It also has this kind of post install command as well, because it can like install dependencies and other, just any other kind of initial setup. So it's kind of neat just because you can Truffle unbox and then the name of the box, and it kind of spins up a bunch of stuff, kind of clones it or downloads it, and then kind of can get things kind of somewhat set up for you if needed. Kind of next along is compile. So this will kind of essentially build your project, generates all the what's called the build artifacts. So for every contract you have, it will generate a corresponding artifacts file. That's kind of, I wouldn't say it's legacy, but that's the incumbent format that we have for storing things like the the bytecode and the ABI and so on. We're all stored in these sort of files that are generated when you compile it, and that's then what's used when you migrate, and we'll talk about in a moment. And yeah, I'll kind of park some of the detail in fact to later, but as you can see, these are kind of going through some of the steps in that lifecycle we're just alluding to, from kind of getting an empty project or a boilerplate project or a box, compiling it, obviously test, debug, probably self-explanatory. I won't go through them in depth just yet. And then finally, migrate as well to actually deploy it somewhere. So for each of these, I just wanted to kind of, well, for three of the ones, just call out a little bit more detail on them, just to kind of lift the lid. Again, if you are kind of brand new to the space, hopefully this will just give you a little bit of a, well, not when I say brand new, just brand new to using Truffle, not necessarily brand new to the space, but you can see here, that flow. So once you've got Truffle installed, you can, in this case, Truffle init, and you can see the console output here, and it will essentially create, what I've done here is initialize the project and then just looked at the direct, ls or ll, the output of what's been generated, and you can see here, it's kind of spilled over here, but contracts directory, it just creates a migrations file. I won't go into detail on that. Or migration contract, migration scripts, test directory, and then the Truffle config, which is kind of all the kind of metadata about your project. So without having to do anything other than installing Truffle, running init, you've essentially got a bare bones project. Next example of a command, so I can change the title on this one, is compile. And then what I've done just before here, which I didn't mention this command, is Truffle create contract, and then the name of the contract. So that creates essentially almost like a hello world type file for you, without having to kind of copy and paste one in or write it yourself. And then all I've done is run Truffle compile, and you can see here the migrations.sol and the new one that we created off the back of hello are both compiled, and you can see the output where it puts the build artifacts just here, and the version of the compiler that's used, and so on. And again, you can see in here, that should be build/contracts. I don't think I kind of threw some of this in quickly. And you can see the output here as well, the two artifacts files for the two contracts that we have. And that's, again, all the kind of contents of things like the bytecode and so on that you'd use to then deploy this somewhere. And then finally, and again, I didn't update this title here, but the migrate is a command used to essentially deploy the contracts to a destination. Now, in this case, what I've done is run something called Truffle Develop. I didn't call this command out yet. This behind the scenes spins up a Ganache instance, and I'll talk about Ganache directly after this. Essentially a kind of local blockchain instance for you to start immediately playing around with. You can do that in other ways too. You can start Ganache differently. It's a nice little shortcut way, I guess you could say. And then what I've done is done a migration. Gosh, I'm sorry, these I didn't fill in a couple of things. I didn't run, the migrate should be written there. And you can see some output that it actually goes ahead and runs the migration scripts. In this case, it's just attempting to deploy the migration solidity file. But don't worry too much about the detail on this. It's just the idea here is to give you a flavor of the kind of flow that you would go through when using the CLI, the Truffle CLI, albeit with a few things missing on these slides. Cool. Let me just check I haven't missed any questions or anything. And if I have, Shay, feel free to shout out. Okay. Yeah, I'll keep going. I saw something. I don't know if it was a question. But yeah, Shay, feel free to shout out if I'm missing anything in terms of questions or clarifications.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it was mainly from Clemens. He was saying a lot of great plugins out there. A shout out to Mythex on VS Code to keep a lookout for known vulnerabilities.
Absolutely, Clemens. Yeah, thanks for calling that out for sure. Yeah, cool. Alrighty. So let's keep going. So yeah, Ganache. So I kind of alluded to Ganache already. Works very, very closely with Truffle, so much so they're, can be almost thought of kind of as intertwined in a way. But what Ganache is a zero config almost. I mean, you can spin it up with additional kind of configuration if you want to kind of change the defaults. But it spins up essentially a local blockchain environment for you, and you can see. Oh,
Kevin, sorry to interrupt. Before you go into Ganache, I did miss a question around Truffle CLI. This came in from Aladdin. Do we have the Truffle CLI available on NPX? That's the question.
Yes. Well, NPX is just like a script runner, right? So if you were then to do NPX Truffle, what it would do, and this is more of just an NPM thing, right? It would look locally. I think it looks, if you run it in the context of a project that has a package.json, it will look in the bin directory first there to see if Truffle's installed locally in that project. If it isn't, it looks globally in your globally installed, wherever you've configured globally for your packages to be installed. And if it doesn't find it there, then it will actually go out and pull it down and run it, pull it down from NPM. And yes, that will work. I think if that's what your question is about. So yes, it will work. If you did NPX Truffle in it, for example, and that's without Truffle installed at all. I think that answers the question. Feel free to add a follow-on if I've kind of missed something Kevin. There. Yeah, good question though. Yeah. Cool. All right. So Ganache, Ganache really, as I mentioned, is a kind of essentially a local EVM-based, I should stress, blockchain environment, designed to be simple in the sense, minimal kind of overhead to get up and running, and to give you kind of all the key constructs that you need to get started quickly. Because you could, run another, client software, node, you could Geth or Parity or something, and configure it such to kind of behave in the same way Ganache behaves, but it's just overhead. In the sense, I don't say you would never do that, but just there'd be more configuration and kind of defaults you'd need to change to start it up. Whereas Ganache is kind of laser focused on the kind of dev use case. So as you can see from the commands here, if it's not too small, again, I'm installing it globally. Again, if you didn't, it does come pre-installed with Truffle as a CLI, so you could then do Truffle Develop as we just saw. But if there's other reasons you might want to install Ganache separately, if you want to kind of test against it or do other things, I'll talk about, perhaps allude to some of those later. But yeah, you can install it standalone as well, and then literally once I've got Ganache installed, you can then just run it. And I've kind of concatenated this, or trimmed this down a bit, but it starts up. I can't remember which the default port is with CLI, but it starts running, spits out 10 accounts and the corresponding like public and private keys, or addresses and private keys, and just gives you a bunch, the mnemonic and so on, just all ready to go. And you can start, running, firing off RPC commands and migrating to it, et cetera, et cetera. So really, the use case for it is just to make that whole life cycle and working against a kind of local node as simple as possible. Same requirements as Truffle, so written in Node, and comes in two flavors worth calling out. We have both the CLI version, which is kind of the equivalent of what you see on the right, and then we have a GUI-based version as well, which is kind of, I'm always on the fence, and I'm being kind of candid because this is internal as to the utility of, and I'm not bashing the GUI version. I love some aspects of it that it kind of surfaces all the constructs, as you can probably not quite see here, but like accounts, blocks, transactions, contracts, core constructs that you need to be aware of, particularly if you're new, but it has limitations. For example, you can't invoke, functions against contracts from within the GUI. So what I like about it is the fact it surfaces some nice stuff, which is really great for beginners, but then very quickly, you can kind of come up against a bit of a wall where it's like, oh, you want to do something more meaningful? Okay, now jump over to the CLI. Well, not more meaningful, but important as part of the build and dev workflow. So again, kind of candidness, but it's definitely still useful, and I do still recommend it to someone, brand new, because it just if only just because it surfaces things or constructs that are important to start getting to grips with, to understand, the space, from a technical perspective, or, Ethereum and, EVM-based chains and so on. So yeah, just kind of, again, raising some of the limitations of the GUI version there, but it's still good, still useful. So that's kind of Ganache in a kind of nutshell there, kind of carrying on quickly through a quick tour of the tools in the suite. So another one is something called Truffle Boxes. Again, if you're not familiar, in fact, I don't have the link up here, but it's at trufflesuite.com/boxes. We have a lot of them now. And these are really great boilerplates for just two reasons, I guess. One is for learning, because you can just, as you saw earlier with that command, just Truffle unbox a box, and then it stores the dependencies, often does sometimes it does other things, and then you can just get started. And they typically have great docs or a good README, maybe not docs, or docs in the README, and gets you up and running and prodding around with things and understanding things really rapidly. So it's great from a learning standpoint. It also is really, depending on the box, and some of them aren't going to be as useful for this, but a good kind of baseline or a scaffold for a new project as well. Again, I say that caveat that not all boxes are necessarily great for that. They may not have good defaults or good practices baked into them. So but they can be, depending on the box. And if you ever, by the way, any questions on anything related to anything we do, Truffle, questions now, but definitely questions after this as part of the hackathon and beyond. But anyway, boxes. We have 3 flavors of them. Official ones that we maintain, partner ones where we perhaps have a bit more of a kind of formal relationship, some capacity with another protocol or company or whatever, and they've created a box and we'll kind of give it a bit more visibility and a bit more love and so on. And then we have this long tail of community ones where folks perhaps created a box and just want to get it listed, which is awesome too, right? So but then we have less of a sort of oversight. We vet them, but we don't. They may fall behind in terms of maintenance, and things break within either a Truffle, as Truffle evolves, or any other things in the box. We obviously don't really keep. It's impossible for us to keep a close eye on all of them. So yeah, but that's the kind of 3 categories. And then to install a box, as mentioned, it's Truffle unbox, and then the name of the box. You can also put a GitHub repo URL in here as well for the box path, or if it's even not listed on our GitHub org where we store the boxes, which is actually Truffle-box, and then all the boxes are under that org. Then you can just put in a path to any GitHub repo in that third in that parameter there. A few little graphics along the bottom here for some of the newer ones. So we had a Polygon or Matic box go live last week. So Thane on the team kind of built that, which is a really awesome box for deploying to Polygon, so the L2, via Infura as well, which is new support for Infura. I think they're running I think it's their testnet. I'm not quite sure. I haven't actually played with this box. Well, I did a little bit, but I didn't deploy it to the kind of test / mainnet yet. But either way, that's a great one to play around with. Polygon's L2. Another example, and these are just some examples. Aave has a nice box, so if you want to kind of play with their service, then nice box that kind of with a good README, a good example. Another one, in this case, I created this box. So this is a Truffle Filecoin box, and showcases some of the support we have for both IPFS and Filecoin, which is kind of neat. And this actually plays with something called Filecoin flavored Ganache. Still need a better name for that. But that's basically a version of Ganache that simulates a Filecoin kind of Lotus node and all their RPC methods and so on. And then this box kind of goes through spinning that up and playing around with it. So if you did want to dive a little deeper on Filecoin and or IPFS, that's a good box to do that. I threw this little guy in here on the right, just because this is a little bit of a teaser of a box we'll be looking at later in this session. So like, what on earth is that? Yeah, that's upcoming in a bit. Cool. So that kind of was a quick tour of Truffle, very briefly of Ganache, very briefly on boxes. What I want to do on this slide is just call out some of the new stuff and kind of upcoming stuff. And I've got a line here on Teams as well, which I already alluded to. So kind of grab bag, sorry for all the bullets, but I just wanted to kind of unpack a few of these. First one is something called Truffle DB. So this is a newish thing. It's not brand new, but it's something we're putting a fair bit of energy into as well, which is essentially can be thought of as a replacement for our artifacts format, wherein think of these artifacts that get generated when you do a compile. They're pretty heavy, and if you then load those directly into the front end to get at the contract addresses and the ABI and so on, it's cumbersome. So DB is a way of kind of really rethinking that, and it gives you a GraphQL interface or schema with which to query exactly what you need at any given point in time. So that's a pretty cool new thing that we're putting effort and time into to kind of ripple out there into the community a bit more. Truffle itself, another Truffle thing is, as I mentioned earlier, a big focus for us now is on really robust L2 support. And L2, although you think, well, it's just scaling on top of an L1, there's various ways in which you do that. So that's one thing. And having sort of first class sort of support in Truffle, it's not in my first class. You can often use Truffle to deploy to an L2, but it's maybe you have to kind of a little bit hacky or whatever, and it's certainly not kind of first class in the sense that it's L2 aware yet. That's changing, and and I said a big focus for us, and particularly just things like because L2s, it's not L2 in a vacuum. There's communication between the L2 and the L1, both directions. So sort of factoring that in, and then also like L2 to L2, things like connect, and how do we kind of reason and kind of model that in the context of a Truffle project as well. So we are actually rethinking a bunch of stuff, like our migrations approach, maybe making it a little bit more declarative to kind of aid in that and so on. So that's of interest, by the way, either for the hackathon or beyond, reach out to either me or anyone on the team about that, and we can start the conversation, because it's obviously L2s in themselves kind of bubbling away and newish and so on. And did I hear something there? You were saying, I just heard a little sound. I don't know if you're about to interject.
No, I was just mentioning, I agree. And Andre, I'm thinking if I'm saying that right, was mentioning they're looking forward to testing the Polygon box. So that news cool. Is really exciting of you guys rolling that out recently.
Sweet. Yeah. And reach out to either me and I can, as a conduit to someone else on the team, love to chat anything about that, because again, it's
and cool. I was gonna say, mention everybody, please feel free to reach out to Kevin on Slack with any questions regarding this stuff, or like deep dive on any of these topics that he's going over today.
Definitely. Yeah, cool. Yeah, thanks, Jay and Andre, if I got your name right there. Cool. So a few other things to call out kind of under the Truffle suite banner. Ganache is undergoing and imminently going to be released, a complete rewrite in TypeScript, which dramatically improves the performance. Jokingly, I actually don't even know the internal kind of meme / joke as to why we're calling it version 7, because it's not the logical version number. I think we're, I don't even know, 2x, I think, so it should technically be 3. There's some internal joke which has always got over my head. And David on our team would be the person who would definitely know why it's called version 7. That's kind of the working version number of it, but a huge complete rewrite in TypeScript and addressing other things and so on. So that's a big deal. It's a lot faster, and other things kind of benefits for it as well. We're modularizing it a little bit as well, so you can kind of plug in different I should get struggling for the best description there, but essentially it's a lot more modularized. So the Filecoin flavored Ganache is kind of drop in and out, and just as a command, when you spin up Ganache, you can choose the internals. Do you want like a Polygon flavored Ganache, for example, etc. So that's another big thing too. So another one under the Ganache banner, and again, this went live recently, is a Filecoin flavored version, which I already alluded to. Both a CLI version and a UI version as well, which is kind of neat. And this was a partnership we had with Filecoin, or Protocol Labs more specifically, of course. And really nice if you wanted to kind of dive deeper into the kind of Filecoin and of course, by extension, IPFS. And I'll actually touch on kind of both of those in the new box that we'll see in a moment as well. So another thing to call out here is something called Drizzle, kind of coming out of hibernation. If you're not familiar with Drizzle, that was actually one of the icons you saw earlier. And that's a framework for front ends. So for essentially, a low level, it kind of helps synchronize state, between the front end and, as state changes on chain. But then there's high level components on top of it and so on. But it really just hasn't been very actively maintained for a while now. And that's something we're going to be changing, and some active positions open to work on that, and other kind of front end focused things too. And then lastly, I already alluded to this, but yeah, something called Truffle Teams, which was more the kind of DevOps piece for us, as I mentioned earlier, is being sunset. But the nice piece of that is we're actually open sourcing a variety of things that we built as part of it, and one of which is a debugger, or a visual debugger, which builds on top of our CLI debugger, and I'll show that later as well, because that's kind of done. It's early, but yeah, I'll show it, and yeah, it's pretty neat as a complement to the kind of the CLI debugger for sure. And yeah, lots more things to be announced as well. Cool. All right. So kind of moving on, shifting gears again. Just keeping an eye on the time. We're pretty good, I think. And that is ways to extend Truffle, and specifically different, not just Truffle CLI, although maybe all of these are CLI centric, but just ways, think of this more as ways to kind of hook into Truffle, and again, this is the reason I included this, is it's a really nice thing to just have front of mind, when you build, hacking on something, even if your hack isn't specifically Truffle based, if you want to kind of script up something, or extend Truffle's function, write a simple plugin, and they are really simple to create, even that might sound like a ton of overhead, to hook into something else, Codify or Infura or whatever it might be. Things like that would be awesome, and it doesn't have to, the plugin doesn't have to be your core focus of the hack. It could be just a kind of small piece that and the hack is, the core focus of the hack is elsewhere. So with that, how to kind of extend Truffle in various ways. So, and why would you want to extend it? I mean, a little bit up there kind of explains that, fill functional gaps. So that might be reason one. There might be something you think, gosh, it'd be cool if Truffle could do this, and it kind of currently doesn't. Then an extension, and I use extension as the term to kind of ways of extending, or hooking into, or whatever. Also to kind of prevent you reinventing the wheel, so if there's something you find yourself doing a lot, and like either to rerunning the same command, a bunch of commands, time and time again, then you could write, this is good to know about some of these things here too. Or, just for integrating Truffle into other things and so on. So kind of the four ways, and some of them are a little bit forced for extending Truffle, are as follows. So firstly, you can create just simple scripts that bundle up, a sequence of steps, and then can be executed with a command which I haven't mentioned yet, which is something called Truffle exec. And that, you could obviously just run a JavaScript script or Node script, but exec gives you kind of hooks into things like the artifacts and the accounts and other things too. So and you can get this kind of nice syntactical friendly way of running it with Truffle exec, either if you're in Truffle Develop, or just standalone Truffle exec and then the path of the script. Best kind of way to think of these is just for kind of automating kind of steps, as I mentioned, that you find yourself running time and time again. You need to bundle up as a script, and then you can just run it, singly, like with a single command there. Or if you want to share steps with people, rather than perhaps putting it in a README, you could just bundle it as a script, in a scripts directory in your project or whatever, and then say, hey, just run, go ahead and run this. I don't mention that in this deck, but I've got example, pretty robust examples of all of these. But and again, any questions on any of them, just reach out for sure, or of course ask a question now too. Kind of moving along in terms of like kind of comprehensiveness, and beyond a script, if you're hitting limitations with a script, you could create something called a plugin, and then as you can see here in the kind of this line, if you can see my cursor, you can use this with Truffle run and then the name of the plugin. Why would you, where you'd use this versus just a script is typically, at least, for kind of reuse across multiple projects. Nice thing about plugins is they also have access to all the build artifacts and other Truffle stuff, as it were. They can also accept, or more easily accept, more structurally accept parameters as well, which is kind of nice. And they can also be packaged up as a standalone module, like, and then you, for example, could publish that upon npm. That would allow someone to add that as a dependency to your project. And then the only other thing you need to do is add the reference to that in your Truffle config. So that literally is someone, as soon as someone like opened up your project and installed all the dependencies to your project, then, and this is if it's node-based, I guess. I'm not sure if this would work for other frameworks or languages, but either way, then they could immediately run like Truffle run X, like straight away, and then that could do certain things. And I've seen pretty good examples of that. And again, I'll be kind of candid. Hard Hat. If any of you guys played with Hard Hat, which is kind of competitor, not kind of a competitor, does similar things to Truffle, and they have a very kind of, I would say, solid approach to the way in which they do that. So this is something we're focusing on a bit more meaningfully as well, I would say. And then the next bracket is variations of this. And this is a bit of I probably could frame this better. The reason I called this one out is because OpenZeppelin have a really great, what they call a plugin in their terminology, but it's not a plugin in the Truffle terminology that I was just referring to. But it's basically this whole upgrades framework. It's something that they used to have in their like OZ CLI. They've since kind of discontinued that, and then they rolled up this upgrade ability kind of pattern and code and stuff into this, what they call a plugin, as I say, but really it's not a plugin in the Truffle plugin sense, but it's a mix of like some migration scripts and some contracts and process, I guess, steps you go through to make your project, your contracts upgradable. If you needed that as a thing, depending on what you're doing, of course, and what you're building. So that's kind of a variation. Again, probably a bit of a forced fit thing, but again, probably could be done better. But I just wanted to kind of call that one out for what it's worth. And then finally, again, a bit forced, but as a Truffle box, not really an extension of Truffle, but it's just a way of kind of sharing something, context of a protocol or a great front end or something. So it's kind of an extension, maybe in a way, but again, a little bit forced, to be honest. But they're the ways, great hooks and great ways in which you can kind of build, like, sort of integrate with Truffle or kind of tie it to other things or, automate things and so on. Cool. And then another kind of hackathon tip for what it's worth. This box, this isn't published yet. I probably should publish it under our official list of boxes. It's a box I created called Bento, which just contains all 4 of those examples, and the repo is just here. And if Shay hasn't shared the slides yet, you'll get access to these. And you can see if you don't get a chance to write it down now, but if you did want to check it out, it's got actual code for all of these. Got an example, bunch of scripts, a couple of scripts, got an example of a kind of boilerplate Truffle plugin. And it's got an example of the OpenZeppelin upgrade framework, and it's packaged as a box. So it's a bit meta because it's that 4th one, which is kind of forced. And I presented this at our yearly conference, which we had towards the end of last year, called TruffleCon, and the video's there as well. Cool. So yeah, if you want to kind of just see examples of that, that's kind of useful. Again, maybe for the hackathon, if you're going to hack on something like this. Cool. Any questions, Shay? Feel free to shout out. Otherwise, and feel free to ask questions as well. That you have.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't see any questions yet. Everyone, again, feel free. I think you've been kind of pinging on the chat, but yeah, load those up into the ask a question queue here. And I just posted your slides, Kevin. So if anybody wants to check out the slide deck that he's showing today. Also, as a reminder to everyone, I forgot to mention that these workshops on CrowdCast are available for replay pretty much probably about 5 minutes after it's done at the exact same link. So it's really great. You can rewatch this, but also take a look at his slides because there's probably links in there too, right, Kevin, that you can click into.
Yep.
And of course, and you can always connect with Kevin on Slack. Make sure to, join us on the ConsenSys Hackathon 2021 channel. That's where we'll be posting everything about the event, and then also reposting these slides as well as the replays of these videos. So yeah, I think you can jump right into the next section of your content, Kevin. All right, cool.
Thanks, Shay.
Oh,
cool.
one last thing.
So,
did you want, just to interject, did you want me to go through the polls real quick just to see what we have in terms of
Sure. Yeah.
Feeling?
Yeah.
Okay. So basically, just so you have a sense of the audience today, have you deployed a Dapp before? Actually, most people have not that are on the session today, and some people have, and with Truffle. Nobody has deployed without using Truffle, which is interesting. Well, that's good. Have you ever installed Truffle? Most people have, yes, and some people have not yet. And have you deployed something to a testnet or a mainnet? Most people have deployed who answer that question, but only on a testnet. And then a few people have not, and then some have both testnet and mainnet. And then finally, have you deployed something to an L2? Most people said no, not yet.
All right.
Okay.
Cool.
So,
yeah. Thanks, Shay.
There you go.
Cool. Yeah, it's good to know. It's good to know. Yeah, thanks. Cool. Alrighty. So a good segue, because this box that we're about to see now does a bunch of stuff. And it has some L2 hooks. Not really the official, because we don't really have anything official in Truffle kind of regarding L2. I mean, we'll see have that Polygon box, and that does, but that does have L2 support. But what I meant by official is like the way in which our tools evolved to support L2s, because that's incoming. But this box, as we'll see, has some hooks into it, because it's not that you can't deploy or work with L2s with what we have today, but it's just not as robust and kind of thought through and first class or whatever as it will be, or should be, or could be, whatever. Cool. So let's get hands on. So what I'm going to kind of get hands on with now is kind of segueing into the building, deploying a Dapp, and so on piece of, hence the title of this session. Is I've kind of already done a bunch of stuff, of course, but this is a new box called Truffle Creator, and so I'll be showing that in a moment. And a new thing, a visual debugger, as I mentioned, something we kind of taken out of Truffle Teams. Well, that's the two things. And then I guess the process for this, because we're going to be unboxing, well, I've done it, but if you were to do this yourself, and installing, and then we're going to kind of make a change and going to go through a little bit of that life cycle we just talked about in the context of this new stuff, which probably means it will break, whatever, maybe not, I don't know. But yeah, and then so kind of just, I guess, backing up a little bit. In this case, we're unboxing, and it's using OpenZeppelin's ERC721, so an NFT standard, as close as we have to a standard for a non-fungible token, which obviously is kind of evolving and changing a little bit, 1155 and so on. But so yeah, if you want to play with this, and it is vanilla to start with, so it's just literally out of the box 721. From a contract perspective, it's got a big front end component which we're going to look at. But yeah, you could start with, start by doing that. So Truffle Unbox. This isn't live yet, by the way. I haven't published it to our boxes because it's all so new, but it will be. Yeah, just got the flow of this bit completely clear in my head yet, but you get the idea. That's the unbox, and then to install all the dependencies, it would do it anyway, but either via npm or yarn. npm yarn if you don't run any, I can't remember what yarn's install command is, but like npm install, the equivalent of if you just run yarn, that's kind of the shortcut to install all the dependencies. Then in this case, I'm running, and I've got all this running just to make the demo a bit easier. I'm running Truffle Develop, which spins up a Ganache instance and then migrated it. So, these are the steps. And this is all in the README for the box as well. And then to start the front end, because this has a front end piece, you just use yarn start or npm run start as well. And I'll make sure all this is in the README. It's kind of, I think it's mostly there, but it's just, again, this is brand new, which makes the demo a bit more dangerous, but a bit more fun because it's kind of nice and fresh. So that's that. And this is some screenshots. It looks kind of wacky. And I'll show this live in a sec. But this is the visual debugger on the right-hand side. And then this is this Truffle Creator on the left. Let me just make sure I got through everything I wanted to show first. Yeah, slide-wise. Okay, let's jump into it. I guess so. Just briefly, I didn't prepare this, but yeah. So I guess this is the UI, and I'll kind of just show this, in a moment. But just before we do, so this is the underlying contract. It's pretty much vanilla ERC721 OpenZeppelin, using one of their utilities, this counter utility, and actually this is already burnable. The upgrade bit I was going to do is going to make it burnable. And if you're not familiar with kind of what burnable means. It just means you can kind of essentially take that, in this case, an NFT or a token out of existence. Essentially, the ID, essentially gone in the mapping that it's contained within. Anyway, that's the contract. And then, of course, the way in which you go ahead and deploy this. I've got all this up and running just to make the demo smoother. I've spun up Truffle Develop as I just showed in the slides, and then you can go ahead and run migrate. Of course, Truffle Develop, it just spins up a Ganache instance for you. You could do it via Ganache CLI or Ganache UI, and that you wouldn't need to run it from Truffle Develop. You could then just do Truffle console to connect to that instance, or just run the commands, Truffle migrate, for example. So various ways. I'm going to kind of go quickly, but questions if needed as we go through this. So that's the contract. Now let's have a look at what this actually the front end does, and so on, and we'll look at the L2 piece and blah 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 blah. So it's kind of fun. The emphasis on this box was kind of novelty factor. So what you can do is create a truffle. There's some overhanging stuff that I played with here where you can load asset art from an existing NFT by its metadata. But let's say we want to load up our own custom truffle, put some eyes on it, and then make one of them like a laser eye. By the way, I might change all this customization ability. It's kind of limited right now. And just add some text to name this truffle. Oh gosh, that's gone beneath this. So it's kind of fun, maybe. So we can name this Shay. That's a bit weird with the smile. Let's just do that, Shay. Hope you don't mind, Shay. We may be burning you later, by the way.
No, that's okay. I like it. I get to be the NFT, the special, unique NFT. I love it.
So another kind of neat piece of this box is you can save the asset, so the image there, and the metadata directly to IPFS via Infura's IPFS gateway. Hello. Weird, but let's go ahead and save it. There's a few hacks going on with this box too, because the image, it will save if this, sometimes there's a bit of a lag, but it does say, there we go. And then the same for the metadata, but that image, again, this box is a little bit hacky in places, but it saves the image as a, embedded in an SVG. So it's base64 encodes the image and puts that inside an SVG. Just couldn't figure out a way to do it via inline in a browser, save it directly to IPFS. I think it might be a limitation, but that could just be me. So either way, we've essentially saved the metadata and the image for this NFT, using, arguably using the sort of closest we're getting to a standard, good practice way for doing it on IPFS. Similarly, we'd want to then have, give some robustness around the preservation of that as well. So this is two things. One is this hooks into some of the Filecoin stuff I mentioned earlier. This won't work because it assumes I'm running Filecoin flavored Ganache locally, and you can create a simulated storage deal there as well. And again, that's beyond the scope of this session. Or just more of a traditional pinning service, such as Pinata, where you have the CIDs or content hashes, and you just pass this service that, and it will pin them for you. So basically the point being, and again, if you're not familiar, IPFS has these kind of content addressable hashes, and for it to persist indefinitely, at least one node needs to be pinning that asset. Otherwise it can disappear over time. So again, if that makes sense, maybe not. But either way, it will last. Even if you don't pin it, it will probably be around for a couple of weeks at least. So yeah, all good for this demo. And in fact, let's just have a look at the metadata as well. And then you can see here, that's the name Shay, the description hello, and then the IPFS link there. And because of course we're in Brave, Brave has direct support for the IPFS protocol, which is kind of neat. I was speaking to someone from Microsoft recently and trying to get them to put this directly into Edge as well. Totally random point, but hopefully other kind of browser providers will support that too over time. So anyway, save that, and then now we can mint. And this is where it kind of spills over in some of the L2 stuff as well. Now, if we want to mint it, I've already tested this just before this session. That's where we see this message. I didn't kind of refresh, but if I want to mint to the L1, pop this MetaMask, and we can just go ahead and send that transaction. Through demo start, my machine's going really slow. Okay. So all good. Minted again. We've already minted one. I won't show this L2 stuff just yet, but if you do want to play around with it, feel free. You can switch your MetaMask to scale. This is just me really hacking with this, and we may take some of this out for the box for various reasons. But if you're interested, we'll keep some, I'm sure. And well, with TBD, we may add support for lots of L2s in this one box, like optimism and stuff we're talking about. So because we're exploring kind of patterns around from both a developer experience and also a user experience, that life cycle as well. Because if you are using L2, depending on what you're doing, in this case, we need to bridge it back. If we are minting it to the L2, we need to bridge it back to the L1. And again, beyond the scope of this session, but it's part of the focus of this box has been to explore that life cycle for sure. So anyway, irrespective of all that, I've just minted it to the L1 for now. And then it should be in the gallery. It says Coven there. This is just all local. This just is a bit hacky right now, and it maybe won't load up. I don't know why. It doesn't really matter, because what I wanted to then show is the debugger as well. So if we now go back, so this is a great example. I'd say this because I've worked on some of this. A good example of a plugin. So what I've done now is this was a dependency of this project, and I'm running. Oh, let me just ignore this error message here. This was so all I've done now is alongside starting the front end in this tab and running my Ganache instance in the left-hand tab, I've also started this plugin, which is a dependency of this box. So it's referenced in my package.json here somewhere. Truffle plugin debugger. And then the only other thing you need to have in your Truffle config, and this is obviously kind of assuming you familiar with what Truffle configs are and stuff, because I touched them earlier, but very high level. You just need to have this plugin reference here as well. So kind of your project knows it's one thing just to install it as the actual the package in your node modules, but you also then need to tell Truffle that it's there. And then assuming those two steps are done, you can then just literally ignore that output. That was just me doing something funky. You can then run Truffle run debug start. You can see off the back of this plugin command, this run command, and then you could omit the need to have start. You could just like Truffle run debug, and then going back to the point is it then starts this visual debugger. There was one thing you need to change. We're probably gonna change this, so maybe it automatically picks it up. So it's a bit janky kind of setting screen here. What we can then do is go ahead and actually visually debug things. Hopefully this will work. I didn't really kind of test this bit out that thoroughly. It's kind of going slowly. It makes me nervous. It might just be my machine. Yeah, it's a bit sluggish. Thankfully, if it doesn't work, because my fan's whirring away here, I think it might be because of, let me just do a kind of refresh on this page. I've got screenshots of it. It normally works fine. It's just, I think it could be just the speed. Even refreshing my page is taking a long time here. While it's thinking about it, what I'll show is, well, you can see a screenshot of it here. So it allows you to just debug, essentially step through the exact path that in this case, the mint invocation executes. And it's neat in the sense that all the files that the kind of execution of that function passes through will be shown here. So as you start to step through, did that load in the end there? Okay, let me try one thing. I think it might just, because probably you should never do is just before a live demo, just hack around with stuff. Let's just see if this. I mean, you get the idea. It's just nice if it does work. There you go. Okay. Well, while it's still thinking about it, my machine's definitely slowed that right down. I think it's because of the CrowdCast screen share and everything like that. But you can then step through, and yeah, it's kind of nice. And the reason I like to call this out, A, because it's an example of a plugin. B, because it's really nice from a learning standpoint as well. As a complement to doing what you're doing, because you see transactions as that. You saw that, and if you saw that earlier, you might not. Oh, there we go. It's just my machine's being slow. As transactions are sent, and we can do this from the CLI in a moment, you see them all show up here, which is kind of nice, and just kind of complements other things. And of course, you can do this from the CLI. And if you're just kind of more already immersed in it, living in the CLI or in your terminal, then maybe just go ahead with that, and you could do like Truffle Debug and then the transaction hash. Whereas this just kind of makes that whole sort of workflow a bit easier and obviously a lot more visual. So what you can now do is keyboard shortcuts. So I can start stepping into, in this case, it was the mint. And that was the command that was triggered off the back of minting the guy that we just saw minted earlier. And yeah, you can see here, I'll step back out. We're stepping over now, and you can just see this is using the counter as utility, setting the URI, metadata, etc. for that. So, and it's kind of neat because I say you can step into the mint function. And my machine's just going slow, so it's normally pretty fast. Could be faster, I think, at times. There's a lot is loading into the browser, but it's normally way snappier than this. But I'm just stepping over stuff here. Obviously, you can use commands up here. You can add breakpoints. It's kind of cool, and you can just browse around. As I said, all of the files that are loaded, that basically that function call will essentially touch all of those 5 files along the top. So it's really nice to kind of prod apart, whatever code you got running, add breakpoints, see the state, decoded state on the right, top right there, or at least everything but mappings, because we don't support mappings, because they're really hard to support. So yeah, that's kind of the plugin there. I'm glad that kind of worked. And then one thing I was going to do as well, so that was just kind of adding the ability to make it burnable. So I already have, I'm already importing ERC 721 burnable.sol, I think it is, which essentially adds the ability to burn your token, in this case, burn the NFT. What I was going to show, but I've just kind of already got it added, is just the kind of workflow with adding that, essentially kind of remigrating, because you've essentially made a change to your contracts, and so on. But it's already there, and we can actually cross-reference let me just close this guy, and you can see here my code. So I originally had this commented out and was then going to add it. Then obviously just get your contract to derive from it, assuming you're importing it. So that makes it burnable. I say the workflow would then be that you would go ahead and kind of migrate again with a reset. The reason kind of I left this in, or partially left this in, was just because you then need to restart the debugger, because it doesn't kind of pick up the new artifacts, because essentially you've changed something. That's going to be something I will change within this visual debugger as well. So just you don't have to kind of restart it. It's a bit cumbersome, of course, but easy-ish fix for that. Again, all of this is kind of new, which is part of the reason I wanted to show it, because it's kind of fun. Anyway, it's already there. So what we can now do is just call like I equals await, and then the name of our contract, and deployed. And I think it might be ID2. So Shay, we're about to burn you, unfortunately. I think
don't do it. Oops, no, I was kidding.
Don't do it. Yeah, we can remint you again in a moment.
Okay.
Come back to the ashes.
Like a phoenix. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Let's see if this works. I think you would have been ID2, because I did just test this out before this, before starting this session. The initial ID will be 1. It's just that counter, that OpenZeppelin counter utility, which is kind of increments them. So now we can go back to our list of transactions. We should see, yeah, there's a little issue there with it. We saw block 5, because each transaction in Ganache gets added to its own block, kind of as their instamined. That's not normal, exactly how it would flow into like a real network, but for the sake of Ganache and the defaults, that's what happens. But either way, this isn't persisting the kind of historic blocks right now, so that's another little nuance. But now assuming this doesn't take an age to load again, we should see this jump straight into that burn method as well, where we burn the newly minted Shay. We could remint again. Gosh, this is slow. I think it's just my machine is, I just was not doing this before, but it did get there. So at least we saw it once.
I'm feeling refreshed already.
Maybe you don't want to be burned. Shay. Like, no, I'm not going. Anyway, you kind of get the idea. That's the debugger, and take my word for it, it's not this slow. But then again, if you do test this out and it's feeling a bit sluggish, any feedback on performance or features with any of this stuff, the box, this plugin, or anything else, of course, definitely feel free to reach out. Gosh, I think my machine's just unhappy right now. Cool, and I think I did have everything here. So you can see this was the steps I went through. Then this was just if you wanted to kind of add that burn, I was going to put on a separate branch, or you can just add the import and then derive your Truffle Creator contract from burnable, whatever the name was, and then kind of restart stuff. But again, that flow can be a little bit improved, but that's the kind of current state. Let's just jump back and see if it's, hey, there it is. So let's just step in again, and I think it will take us into this burn here, and it does a check to make sure, because it only allows the owner of a or approved owner, I think, like the admin of the contract or the owner of the token, to burn it before it invokes it, and so on. Blah blah blah. So you get the idea, and you can see here where it's even we've stepped into this burnable and stuff. So it's really neat to be able to visually see this in a way. There's other ways you could visually debug, but this is just a nice one, and again a good example of a plugin, or a kind of richer plugin at least, that has a kind of visual side. Cool. So with that, and that was just some steps on how you add the visual debugger to a new project if you wanted to. It doesn't have to be via yarn, of course. You can npm install it, just add this little reference to your Truffle config, and then as soon as that's done, all going well, you can just Truffle run debug start. And again, caveat, all I've probably said it already, but just to reemphasize it, it's pretty new. So I wouldn't be saying, if this was a public presentation, I would be saying, oh yeah, just go ahead and start, because it's definitely got some edge cases and so on. But given this is internal and it's building up to the hackathon and so on, I figured it was, in the spirit of everything, worth mentioning. So, but yeah, caveats that, there might be quirks for sure with this and the box as well. Cool. So these were the slides I had just in case things didn't work. It kind of got there, albeit a bit slow. Cool. So that kind of covers everything that I wanted to touch on. And again, apologies if the kind of build piece was kind of slow. I know we kind of jumped over a big kind of chasm of like starting an empty, initialized an empty project and talked about boxes. We didn't really kind of go through the kind of more traditional process with which you would build something, because I kind of leapt ahead to having a kind of semi-ish polished project, this NFT project. But the part of the reason I kind of kept it this way is because I want to show you some of that new stuff, or newish stuff, albeit very new. And I didn't want to kind of do too much live coding and so on, because that can be sometimes a bit of even more of a challenge, with quirks and stuff. So I kind of wanted to like leap ahead a little bit, but hopefully that was useful to kind of show both ends of the spectrum, starting something new, and that might be a box as well, which gives you more of a scaffold, more of a boilerplate, and then also seeing something a little bit more polished, albeit not finished, I would say, that box, but it gives you both a nice example of a fun UI, lifting a little bit on the NFT piece, and then that debugger, which is a good example, the visual debugger, which is a good example of a plugin with a kind of visual component to it. So
sorry, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to summarize everything here, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, so I was going to say, maybe this would be a great opportunity I was thinking, what would be, because there is a lot of content here, which is great. What would be the kind of like, you would recommend the most important kind of steps, just like kind of like in terms of, like if we wanted to kind of test this idea that you just showed today, the most important takeaways of like, if you were going to summarize, here, you're just like getting started, like, is it open up a Truffle box, like sign it, like, can you give everybody a sense of like, what was the easiest way to kind of, open up something that they can tinker with and test and actually deploy and see it, happen, and, all that good stuff.
Yeah. Great question. I mean, I think Truffle boxes in a general sense, because some of the other boxes are a bit simpler than what I just showed, because obviously the front end piece, the Truffle Creator, is a little bit more complex front end code. The contracts themselves aren't particularly complex, because it's just literally out of the box Open Zeppelin ERC 721. But that said, I think to answer your question, if you are kind of in that newer end of the spectrum where you've perhaps tinkered a bit with Truffle and or other tools and dev tools, but want to go a bit that next level of depth, I would say Truffle Boxes are really good for that. And have a look at the ones, if you literally go to trufflesuite.com/boxes and look at some of the official ones that we have, they give they're a bit more trimmed down and focused. So we have some that are a little bit more front end focused, where it's like simple storage, almost the Solidity equivalent of like Hello World, and/or other ones as well that kind of would be good if you're in that earlier sort of starting out stage. But we also have boxes, as I alluded to as well, like that Polygon box and the Filecoin box and the Alve box that are a bit further along than that as well. So they would assume you can understand your way around the Truffle project, and by that I mean the concept of a contracts directory and tests and migrations and Truffle config and so on. And then they have that bit more depth to them around the content, whatever the context is. If it's the Alve box, they're going to be you're going to be doing some stuff on Alve, on the Alve protocol, on their protocol and stuff like that. So I think, boxes will be the kind of quick answer to that, and just really spend some time playing around there and just, go from everything from a really simple box. And it's pretty clear when you go there, and kind of graduate up from there. And then depending on, in fact, that's a good, if that answers the question, Shay, it's a kind of segue into what's next, which kind of includes some of the, a little bit more of answer to. These are some things I just wanted to kind of call out, both that are good things to look at in general, I'd say, but also good for the hackathon, to play around with. So yeah, the first one is Truffle DB, which I kind of mentioned, which is a rethinking of our kind of artifacts format, or as the description there says, like a system of record for blockchain metadata. So like the contract addresses that get generated, the ABIs, and so on. Really, if you're familiar with the current artifacts format that we have, this is worth a look, and you can play around with it. We also have something called DB Kit, which is a kind of tool that builds on top of Truffle DB and does some really interesting stuff as well. So take a look at that. And again, A, it's good to know, but B, it could be something you integrate into a hack potentially, or play around with and build upon. Same goes for that Matix there, sorry, the typo, but now called Polygon. So that box there, again, brand new, and it has like support for, or integrates with Infura, or using Infura to deploy to the Polygon testnet. Ganache 7, I'd need to check the branch. There's this, I think this isn't that, if you got this kind of master/main branch there, isn't going to be 7, in quote 7, because it's not technically, I don't know whether we're launching it as major version 7, I'm not sure, but if you're interested in testing that out, reach out for sure. And again, maybe in the context of a hackathon, if you wanted to explore plugging in a different like EVM, I'm struggling for the right word to describe that, because we modularized it. But if you want to kind of dig into that as part of the hack, just get familiar, reach out to me, and or David Murdoch, who kind of leads the Ganache side of things on the Truffle side. And then that bento box, again, is good if you want to kind of explore more of a simpler plugin. That obviously that Truffle Visual Debugger plugin is pretty heavy because it's got a whole front end piece to it and stuff. But if you want to just play, just look at more of a Hello Worldy type plugin, then this bento box has a good example of that, as does, as I mentioned earlier, scripts or executable scripts, and that opens up an upgrade framework and so on. This is the code for the Visual Debugger plugin. We're not really published, it's live or it's public, but we're not really pushing it hard yet. But it's something, it's there and ready to play around with, almost in a kind of alpha state. You could probably best think of it as. So yeah, I think that, again, that kind of part, this is sort of segue on from the original question, Shay, about where to get started. And these are, some slightly more intermediate type things, but definitely good kind of jumping off points to just kind of dive deeper and so on. And then of course my details right at the bottom there to get in touch. And I think that's it. Duplicative because it's there too, is it? No. Maybe it was meant to be there as well, I'm not sure. Yeah, was it there? I didn't see.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. No, yeah, it's on the last slide now.
It is?
You can just drop it onto the last slide. That's that one. Yeah. But everybody has
jumping all over the place.
Oops, it popped back to Q&A. It's can you do one slide more? I think it jumped back to Q&A.
Yeah, it was all over the place.
Yeah. Yeah. It's okay. Yeah, and then everybody, the slide deck I did put in the chat. So if you did want to check out any of those links that he had on that slide, you can click on them there. And yeah, that did answer the question. Thank you. So basically, if you have a specific thing in mind that you want to kind of work, then hopefully, you can check and see, okay, something for Aave, something for the, Polygon. But for a very kind of, like you said, basic get started kind of experience, is Pet Shop tutorial still there? Is that still the one that you guys push? Yeah,
Well,
I know it's like the original one, but I was just thinking like that was more of like an kind of like from start to launch kind of vibe. But
yeah. So yeah, just to
your
briefly
feedback.
unpack that. Yeah, so there's a box, well, there's a tutorial that we have called Pet Shop, which kind of builds up to creating this decentralized kind of pet store where you can adopt a pet and stuff. Yes and no. I mean, I would say have a look and play around with it, go through the tutorial. I mean, the big caveat is it's pretty dated now. So doesn't hurt to play with it, but
there might be some.
It depends where you're at. I would say yes, probably with the caveat that as you're going through it and playing with it, because it's neat in the sense it's very it holds your hand, and the tutorial coupled with the box, because the box is essentially like an empty placeholder type thing, not beyond just like a truffle and knit that we talked about earlier, but it's got some of the kind of key bits, and then you paste in pieces from the tutorial and it
walks you through.
So in that sense it's neat, but it's been on the back burner for us as something we were like, gosh, we need to update this, and it just hasn't kind of happened yet.
Gotcha.
So yeah, I mean, but
that's not terrible to get your feet wet, to kind of like explore and get a sense of like, because it does give good context of why each step and why these different things. And then once you get a bit more, I guess, comfortable, then you can really dive into the other boxes that you have available and obviously give it more context, like, because that's more generic, the Pet Shop example. But I just didn't know if that was still viable, but if it is, but you're saying not fully supported, maybe there might be some
kinks, it's supported.
Always,
I mean, reach out. I mean, internal reach out anytime on anything. So and we, but it's just, I think the only caveat is this a little bit dated. It was created 3 years or 4, I don't know, 3 years ago, which in this space,
I think 3 years ago,
it's a long time.
Right.
Not really been
in the tech world, but no, it still holds pretty solid. But I think there was a couple things that might have needed to be updated, but I think you guys had some notes you added in. But I just want to mention that still, if it's still there, it's not bad. I actually did it myself and I thought it was pretty helpful. But I do think that the ones that you've been creating is awesome, because it really gives more kind of present context to the technology, and then really specifically to the specific protocols, which is sometimes that's the pain point. Great. Or are there any other takeaways before we wrap up today? Any questions, last looming questions? Of course, like we said, I know there's a lot of info today, but Kevin is available and happy to answer any questions on Slack, or like you said, reach out to him. And this is just really exciting to be able to kind of understand how we can really just like, it's not too many steps to get in there and really get our feet wet and like really get a sense of like how we can launch a Dapp from start to launch, and see all the steps and the inner workings and how our tools really facilitate that. Any takeaways, Kevin, that you'd like to share?
Yeah, well, I put the takeaway here: don't forget to reach out, which I've already said. But no, that's true, because as you said, Shay, there's quite a lot here. I think the takeaway is, particularly for the hackathon, that it doesn't necessarily just need to be contracts that you create. It could be scripts or a plugin, or some L2 that helps to like demystify L2s, so perhaps some visualization layer or integration, layer or framework with our other things, as ConsenSys. Right. So yeah, I guess that will be, if anything, a good takeaway, that just don't necessarily, and it's not to say writing contracts or things it wouldn't be the right next thing to do. It depends how you're trying to sort of tackle that, what, both for the hackathon and beyond, what you're trying to solve and either learn or so on. But I would say for the hackathon specifically, come at it, sort of like broadly, you know,
Yeah.
there's so many ways you could, and it doesn't, again, I'm not trying to just pimp doing stuff on Truffle or anything like that unnecessarily, but there's ways that you could just use Truffle in some capacity or visualize something that, you know, make that whole, I mean, my personal thing is, you know, just obsession with the developer experience and how we can make that better, particularly in this space, because it's not bad, but it's still a long way to go before it's perhaps on par with, you know, web, you know, sort of web 2.0 and so on. And that's understandable, you know, because this paradigm is new and there's different things you need to consider and so on. And it's getting better every day. So I would say that, yeah, think of it, you know, many different broad lens on the thing you might try and hack on or solve and so on. And definitely an L2 flavor would be kind of cool, I think.
Yeah, that's
sway anyone in any direction. But
yeah, no, I think that's great.
A long answer.
No, but that's great. No, I think that's important because I think everybody should kind of, that's the exciting thing to do is we're providing the tools to help you guys innovate. So it's really about coming up with a context, a pain point you're trying to solve. Really, that's a good way to come at it. And then hopefully these tools will help you kind of, you know, execute that technically. And to Kevin's point, this is a great opportunity for us to really fine tune our tools by testing them out. And just being a regular user doesn't mean you're experienced at all. If you've never tested Truffle and then doing it for the first time, your feedback is priceless because it should be a great experience. It should be easy. It should be intuitive. So this is helpful for us to be able to fine tune our products. And one last thing, how, you know, there is a connection between Infura and Truffle, which is really nice. I like that. So it's like, so the step, once you, let's say you've created your Dapp, use Truffle to kind of get there, and then you want to test that. So is that the step that connects to Infura, would you say? Would that be how you see that? Or I know Ganache is a test net, but like, what would be the connection with Infura?
Well, I mean, if you want to deploy your contracts to a test net, and even, you know, the poly, because Infura have the support for polygons test. I think Infura's support for Polygon might be a standalone testnet, I believe, because in Polygon have another, whether it's the same testnet or a different one, I'm not quite sure. But I guess, yeah, like
spinning up
question,
your own,
you would, I mean, typically you would run Ganache locally, you know, and do some of the development there, of course.
Right.
And then when you're ready to sort of test it, you know, almost like in a staging style,
like a real-time environment,
but publicly visible to everyone, then that's where, you know, Infura and that, you know, their support for the test nets that they support, and that's growing too with, you know, L2 test nets, would be that's that great. Kind of crossover. I personally still think there's more we can do to just join those, make that ever more seamless. I mean, right now it's not hard, you know, you would just add, you know, get your Infura key, add that to your Truffle config, etc. But
seems like a natural handoff.
But but I think there's more we could do, and that could be a good hack as well. Just even just tackling it doesn't have to be tackling it from a technical perspective. I mean, that there's more we can solve there too. But just even maybe there's some visualization or some handoff type thing or some plugin. I've been using the word plugin a lot. Something, you know. So hacks don't all need to be, you know, really just geeky, low-level techie stuff. Of course, you know. I think just rethinking like flows, you know, visualization flows, or ways in which to help people understand, you know, that perhaps that handoff between L1s, L2s, you know, because that's so new and not so much to solve there too, and solving it from many angles, the tooling side, but beyond. So absolutely.
And I think that's it's something that is a pain point that we're really trying to solve. So like, if anybody's inspired, you know, because really we usually, the greatest stuff comes out of solving our own pain points, right? So we want to make it easier for us to do something. So if you improve even like the life cycle, maybe that Truffle to Infura connection can be even more eloquent. So just some ideas to inspire everybody here today. And well, thank you so much, Kevin. This is a great workshop. I always love your demos and workshops on this stuff, and I'm really excited about Truffle and how you guys, now I know is the focus right now more on layer 2 and like you know, maybe integrating protocols, or like what's been the focus for Truffle going forward?
L2s, as I mentioned, and I guess just, gosh, I mean, that's huge. That's like, because it is so huge, and
you're still kind of figuring out the roadmap.
Industry.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. And then obviously like Ganache, and that sort of pluggability side of things, and support,
Gotcha.
not just support for deploying to L2s, but just the modularizing of Ganache, so you can kind of plug in different kind of internals or different engines. And I'm still struggling for the term that we've been using. I think it's just Monday, just gone, Monday morning, although it's just turned past noon here in CST. My brain's still waking up to that. But yeah, like as in support for their front end, side of things is going to be a refocus for us, because it's something we historically focused on through Drizzle. So that's something we're going to be lighting up again, and rethinking that.
Even CLI, you were thinking maybe improve notification or feedback.
Well, the migrations piece, we're exploring. I know I'm sort of resurfacing stuff I said earlier, but a declarative approach to migrating, because right now it's kind of more imperative. You spin stuff up, through a script, and it's okay, it works, but we're really sort of seriously think about overhauling that, and kind of in the kind of R&D stages of how to tackle it, well, and solve it for sort of longer term L2, L2 to L2, etc. That flow that you're deploying stuff not just to a test net on, then to a mainnet, to mainnet or whatever, but the interaction between the two, and the sort of bidirectionality, and even like I said, the L2 to L2, and how do we kind of model that within the migration, when you're deploying something, both doing it locally and simulating that meaningfully, but then doing it to a testnet equivalent and then a mainnet equivalent, because it's definitely more nuanced and complicated. And I think the risk of keeping it, having it kind of either kind of heavily obfuscated or not well understood is risky, because if you're doing stuff that you don't really understand very well, it could be a ton of vulnerabilities, unintended consequences going on, which, when there's lots at stake, is, as I alluded to earlier, dangerous, right? So very important to solve that. Anyway,
lots of good stuff. And that's great. I just want to get a sense. I know you guys are still working on the roadmap. There's so much to kind of explore, and this is great. So thank you so much. Thank you again for a wonderful workshop. Thank you for everyone joining. Again, this is going to be available for a replay at the exact same link. And please RSVP for the remaining workshops we have going on. A lot of good stuff. And certainly sign up for the hackathon if you're newly inspired, or you have some ideas, or even if you don't have an idea, but you want to join a team, because we have some great ideas that you can pick from. So we would love to see you there. And by the way, there's some really cool prizes, so maybe that's good incentive too. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Hope to see you on the next one.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Shay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.